Well, hello again, and welcome to the Bildad the Shoe Height podcast. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Mike.
Yeah, and we've missed you because we've had a 6-month hiatus.
We have had a 6-month hiatus. Yeah, it's been a while.
It has been a while. Yeah, Mike, you've got one of these things called a job.
Yeah. Job, family. They get in the way.
Yeah, that's right. And I pretend to work as well, so it all takes time. But yeah, we're back. And some while ago we said we were going to go through 3 of the main sections of the book Wild at Heart.
Yeah, so obviously we mentioned a couple of times that we're looking at John Eldredge's Wild at Heart, and we said we're going to look at the 3 core longings of the masculine soul. So those were a battle to fight, a beauty to rescue, and an adventure to live. So the plan today is to look at the first one, so a battle to fight.
This is true. And just getting into this topic, Mike, you're in the military, and the military is associated with fighting.
Indeed it is.
Yeah. So what drew you into that particular career path as a Christian?
Career path as a Christian is so. I mean, I think for myself, I was just generally looking for a more meaningful, more fulfilling career. Yeah, certainly. So I joined 4 years ago, so peak COVID time. So it was nice to have a job whilst everyone was placed under house arrest.
Yeah, You've been doing it a little while now. 4 years.
Yeah, it's flown by quickly.
Years. Wow.
Yeah. So why join? Yeah, as I said, a more fulfilling career. I wanted to be active. I didn't want to be trapped inside an office. I'm an active guy. I like to be active, like to be physical, and wanted to get out of the office and do something that I could be proud of. At the time, previously, I was at Moorlands Theological College where I met yourself.
Yeah.
I felt led to go there, and I felt equally led to leave. And just once I'd got my personal housekeeping bits in order, I felt it was time to kind of move on. And the Navy just seemed to present itself to me.
Cool. Well, I think it's working very, very well for you. And I suppose fights are inherently meaningful. By definition, people have found enough of a reason to go to violence in the context of a physical fight. So fights seem to be meaningful.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Dana White, who's the president of the UFC, he always makes this point. You know, people will turn up to a football game, they'll go to a basketball game, or they'll go to a hockey game, and if a fight breaks out in the crowd, people stop watching the game and turn to watch the fight which is taking place. So there's something in us which is just drawn to fights, drawn to combat. Obviously, the UFC is the fastest growing sport on the planet. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one of the fastest growing sports in the Royal Navy. It's very, very popular in the service, and that's across all 3 services. So Navy and Army and RAF as well. And obviously, it's been a huge part of my life, combat sports. Obviously, moved to Thailand to pursue Muay Thai and that. But yeah, there's something in us.
What's Muay Thai?
So it's Thai boxing. So
Thai boxing.
Kickboxing with knees and elbows.
Yeah, I often just like to annoy Mike by referring to every single martial art under the sun as Kung Fu. To me, it's all just Kung Fu. But I know some of the listeners will also be annoyed by me saying that. Ha ha ha. So fights. So there's something inherently attractive about fights. I think if you do get into a fight, I guess you kind of go into a bit of an automatic stage, automatic phase where it's apparent to you what to do. Like, you need to defend yourself. You need to be alert. You kind of come alive in fights, or I suppose you do if you're a fighter. I suppose some people freeze, but there's something which is kind of like life-giving about fights. And then Christianity talks about fights as well. There's like a spiritual fight. There's a fight to put to death your old, dead, sinful self, and then the fight to kind of put on Christ. In Ephesians 6, the Bible talks about putting on the armour of God. So like the helmet of salvation to remember that you're saved by Christ. You have a saviour. The shield of faith, and there's other bits of armour. So Christianity talks about the spiritual life being a fight, but it's probably a less obvious fight than if you and me were to start punching each other
Yeah, of
right
course,
now.
yeah.
We don't plan to do that. I wouldn't want to put Mike through that.
It is funny. I mean, the first time I read Wild at Heart and got through that chapter of Battle to Fight, I remember obviously just mentioning my background, like being disappointed that it's
Yeah.
like, a spiritual fight. Come on, really? But
Yeah, like it's like, is that real? It's like, so the word spiritual could have the connotation not real.
well, yeah, there is
Maybe.
that. I suppose it was just more the fact that, like, I don't know. I mean, had he said, you know, you need to go and retake Constantinople, there's your battle, I probably would have been up for
Yeah,
it.
it's got like a clear definition.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a place.
But
yeah.
obviously in the West we're a little bit more skeptical of these things. But even though it just felt kind of a bit lacking, and it wasn't until, funny enough, I was listening to a Pints of Aquinas podcast, and kind of says, and I think C.S. Lewis makes this point as well, like Christianity doesn't actually make sense without the devil. As ridiculous as odd as this might sound, he said it would be kind of like the Lord of the Rings saga, but there's no Sauron. So it's
Yeah.
like, there's just these little fellas who have got this rig and they need to go on this journey to destroy it. But it's like, okay, well, yeah, but what's the point?
Yeah,
sort of thing.
absolutely.
It's like seeing that in that context, like, okay, yeah, it's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, if something is going to be interesting to watch, there has to be a problem. Like that's like basic. Even when you're learning to write stories when you're 10, you know, you have to introduce the problem, and then there has to be like the solution or a savior figure. A lot of I feel like a lot of parts of the church, they shy away from, you know, truths about the devil, truths about hell, and they talk about, there's a saviour and God loves you. But I suppose the problem of that, the problem of just only limiting the message to the positives is you think, well, if everything's nice, like, why do I need a saviour?
Yeah,
what am I being saved from?
Exactly. Yeah.
If there's a fight and I have like no opponent, well then how should I prepare myself?
Yeah,
It's all
yeah.
very vague and undefined. So yeah, hell is real. The devil is real and he's dangerous. The Bible says that he prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And I guess to contrast to contrast a physical fight with the spiritual fight, like a physical fight will have a location. If it's like the UFC, it will have like a date. It will be arranged, so you can plan around that. Whereas the spiritual fight that we are in a spiritual fight. It's all the time, and it's like a lion. That idea of a lion, like, even though a lion is strong and powerful, you know, lions typically they target weak prey or like babies or injured prey, and they go for that. They go for the weaknesses, and they go for the weak animals. And I think the devil's the same. Like, the devil doesn't play fair. He doesn't attack people at their kind of strongest point, but he goes for people when they're weak. And I guess that's like Jesus in the desert. So one of the very first things Jesus did at the start of his public ministry after he was baptized is that the Spirit of God led him into the desert, where he was there for 40 days and 40 nights. He's getting physically weaker and weaker and weaker. He's not eating, and the devil comes and tempts him at that point. So there's something of the fact that the spiritual fight, it's ongoing. It's not this big climactic thing like an event, but it's an ongoing battle against Satan. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously he highlights that in the book as we mentioned. Kind of, and so it's, a battle to fight is divided into two chapters. Kind of like part one is the battle, so it talks about the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Yeah.
So kind of like the flesh is like the traitor within. How do we kind of like set ourselves up for for failure and for defeat? And then part two is like the strategy for the battle, where it goes into a lot of the spiritual warfare and praying through past shortcomings and praying through strongholds and so on.
Yeah, so some good advice in there, and you've got a great memory for these books. You've remembered the stages of the fighter.
So in Fathered by God, which is the sequel to Wild at Heart, he talks about the kind of like journeys, or the development of the masculine and so on. He's kind of labelled them as in kind of archetypes. So he, at first, kind of the cowboy. So you think early, like late teens to early 20s. It's kind of all about kind of going out on adventure and testing himself, and he progresses on to the warrior, and kind of the warrior, and similar in a battle fight, needs a cause greater than himself to commit himself to, and then obviously progresses on to the king in the hope that he becomes a bit of a leader. Overlapping the warrior and the king is the lover, because he should be pursuing romantic partner for wife and children. And then after the king becomes the sage, where he becomes an advisor, kind of like a Merlin or a Gandalf advising King Arthur and so on. So upcoming warriors and upcoming kings.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got cowboy, warrior, king, and then sage, and then intertwining that is lover. So I suppose there's kind of like a contrast between the fighting phases and then the lover.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he's using kind of warrior. He's using these kind of narrative terms just because that's what resonates with a lot of the vast majority of men. We're drawn to hero stories. Most of our favorite movies are superhero stories, or we love war stories, and so on. So as we discussed earlier, there's something innate in us which is drawn to these things. But he kind of backpedals on that, because you may be thinking, sitting there listening, being like, okay, well, I have no interest in boxing or kickboxing, or jiu-jitsu, or no interest in joining the military, and I myself am a bit kind of like passive and so on. And kind of that's really what he's addressing. He highlights in Wild at Heart kind of that Adam's first sin really was that he stood passively by as Eve was tempted by the serpent, and he said that that's kind of a sin which haunts the sons of Adam to this day. And I think we're particularly vulnerable to this in a Christian context, because obviously we're taught to love our neighbours and ourselves, and kind of love sacrificially, and therefore put kind of others before ourselves. And it can create, and obviously that's a virtuous thing to do and a loving thing to do, and in many times the right thing to do. However, it can become there's a danger there in that we become passive and too agreeable, and then we don't therefore adequately advocate for ourselves or our families. And there's the danger of if we continue to do that actually a root of bitterness will creep in, and will begin to become resentful. So it's really a pushing back against how passive that we've become in the Christian West.
Yeah. So Adam, as the Bible tells it, he was the first man. Whether literally or metaphorically, he was the first man, and his role and responsibility was to rule and subdue the whole earth. God saw that it was not good for Adam to be alone, because there was no other creature of his kind, and so Eve was created as his helper, and then Adam had a role to kind of rule and protect Eve in a positive and nurturing sense, and he failed in that role because he didn't in those times there was only one rule, do not eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's like, what, there's one rule, you got one job, but Adam sort of failed to defend Eve against the deceit of the serpent. So that's what we mean by, that's what we're getting at by passivity. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right, and obviously, and that affects us in
Yeah.
you know in subtle ways. So whether that's someone perhaps overstepping the mark and just demanding a little bit more of you, maybe that's more unpaid overtime, or you giving up more of your time and spending less of the time with your family, or maybe sometimes it's actually we feel the pressure to kind of be constantly called to love our wives as Christ loved the church, so that's again sacrificially laying down our lives to them. And then well perhaps maybe like even there I'm kind of perhaps kind of so loving my wife that I'm actually, or putting her first, that I'm actually not kind of adequately taking care of myself, and therefore I'm not kind of doing the things that I also need to do to maintain my own physical and spiritual
you've got
health.
you've got to build up to reach a place of conviction. We have to build ourselves up. Like we can't fake conviction, like certainly not in front of God. And I think I'm just remembering there was a time in the New Testament in the book of Acts when there's a group of brothers who are seeing the apostles perform miracles and teach with authority. So then they think, oh, well, we're going to do the same. We're going to say the same words and perform the same actions, and we're gonna be having this conviction in the spiritual fight. And they go to a man who's possessed by a demon, and they try to perform an exorcism. And even though I think there's 7 of these brothers, even though there's like 7 of them, the demon is so strong in the man that the man beats up all these brothers, and they're left running from the scene naked, like stripped of their clothes. So there's this idea like, we can't fake conviction, we can't fake spiritual strength, so it has to come from somewhere. So how do we build ourselves up in the spirit? Can we put some meat onto that for people?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it comes back to kind of how do we build ourselves up spiritually? I'm trying to describe it without using the word spiritual.
Yeah, well, let's try find other words. I suppose what we mean is like God is spirit, but where it becomes helpful for me at least is God also became a man, so he became Jesus. So we've got that role model. So if we want to know what does it look like, God is spirit, what does it look like for me as a bloke? Well, it looks like the life of Christ for one. So we do have something to aim at.
That's true.
It's a bit more solid.
Yeah, and someone like Jordan Peterson would say, we learn by kind of emulation first, by copying.
Yeah.
Children learn by copying and by seeing and acting out what adults do. So in the same way as we as spiritual children, we look at what Christ did, what the apostles did, and what the lives of the saints did, and we act out what they did. So that there's that, but very simply, and how do you do that? Well, time in the scriptures, time reading the lives of the saints, or heroes in their faith, and again you will see that they've got certain practices. They live their lives certain ways, and therefore that's a pathway that we can follow. A great thing to do is great spiritual discipline. It's great physical and emotional discipline, or psychological discipline as well. But fasting in particular in this day and age, it's
we've just had a big barbecue together.
We have, absolutely
fasting, guys. Fasting.
But can you deny yourself? Can you go 24 hours without food, only consuming water? Just getting mastery of your sense. Certainly, it's a good for myself, because I'm an absolute glutton and I'll eat and eat and eat. So just to know, in fact, I can actually overcome my base urges and not eat for 24 hours.
Absolutely, and God, and because you get less of food, the whole idea is to get more of
exactly
God. We become more awake to God. I think but biologically, when we put food into ourselves, when we eat and start digesting, like like the body sends loads of blood into the stomach so that it can do the job of digesting, and that's blood which we kind of lose from our brain, so that like we do get a bit sluggish after eating because of that reallocation of.
I mean, there's
of
loads
blood.
of crazy anecdotes in regards to fasting. As you said, that like mental clarity, because all the blood's not rushing towards the stomach, you're able to think clearer. And it's crazy because after the first day, so the longest I've been for a fast is 72 hours, so that's 3 days.
Quite a long time, for a Western man.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Whereas. Yeah, like I said, we're not going out food because of lack. It's because, you know, we've chosen to do this, which is a totally different type of hunger, obviously. But like once you've gone through the first day, you actually bizarrely just stop feeling that hungry. Yeah, it's really quite strange.
You go into you go through the wall, don't you?
Yeah. So the first day is always the hardest, but like the second day and then partway through the third, you're really not that. That hungry.
You kind of
strange.
cracked it for a time. Yeah. Okay. Something I wanted to pick up on. You said copying. So we talked about the person of Jesus, and we talked about we can grow spiritually through copying. We can copy him, or when we see Jesus or Christ likeness in other people, we can copy that. And I think copying is such a good way to learn.
Yeah, 100%. It's like you either is I don't know why you wouldn't do that.
but people put like in school sometimes you're told copying's wrong. We've just been with your daughter actually. It's great to see her growing up, and sometimes when we make monkey noises she might copy, which is great. But obviously babies massively learn by copying. Like without copying, babies are completely stuck. But yeah, and even skills like if you need to learn how to like paint a room properly, one of the best ways of learning is just to see someone do it. So you see that person model it and you copy. But in order to copy someone, you have to kind of submit to them. You have to study them, observe them. Not only see what they're doing, but kind of like understand their approach, and you got to take the time to be a bit.
Yeah. Well, you have to humble yourself
you have
at
to be
the
humble.
end of the day, because you have to acknowledge, in fact, I don't have the skills to do this, and I want to do this, or I need to do this, and therefore there has to be that acknowledgement that actually I don't know what I'm doing. I need to go find someone who does. So for myself, whilst at theological college, accumulated too much short-term debt. So I wasn't very good with money. So I needed to find someone who was. And thankfully there's the internet. And then along came Dave Ramsey. It's like, this guy's quite good with money. And he's made all the mistakes I've got. And he's got freedom.
So he's like me. So there's hope.
Yeah.
So he once was kind of like me, but he's found a way out. Yeah. So if he is like me and he has found a way out, then there's hope for me. So to change from like, oh, I'm stuck here, to hopelessness is probably the first stage. And I guess the saviour we have, Jesus, sometimes it's hard to know that he is like us in as far as he's human. He became fully human. Like he was fully born to Mary. Yeah, I know God's his father, but Mary is his mother, like in a full sense. And he had to grow up from a baby. He was carried on his mum's back. He had to go through kind of early stage schooling and learning. We don't know a lot about his early years, but he did grow really, really quickly. When he was 12, he was asking really impressive questions to some rabbis. But Jesus can identify with us because he was tempted in every way you and me are tempted, and every type of way everybody was tempted. So Jesus isn't some perfectionist who is sort of completely out of our reach, but he was a human who overcame every human problem, and he won the fight.
Yeah. And even if sometimes, like, even though we know and we read who's tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. It's kind of like that yet without sin, which sometimes can, at least it gets me a little bit sometimes. I think, okay, well, yeah, Christ may have been tempted as I was, but like he was without sin, and you know, I'm certainly not that. I, you know, kind of resonate with Paul a bit, who, you know, says, you know, chief of sinners, which I think why actually the Bible is really encouraging in this way. And again, reading the life of saints or lives of your spiritual heroes is just how flawed they all are.
Oh yeah,
you know,
Paul like instigated murders of Christians. Before,
and Abraham, scumbag. You know, they go through. Yeah. Literally, Genesis is just a story of one scumbag after another until you get to Joseph, who's like pretty squared away. But God used them. You know, is kind of there's a. I think it's a Womackism, but you know, some people will say, "Oh, God can't use a broken vessel," and like he will say, "Well, God ain't got any other vessels to use."
Yeah. So going back then to humbling, humbling one's self before God. I think to humble yourself, I think it has to be an intentional action. Like I'm not naturally humble. Like naturally, I just want to kind of keep on doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. Yeah. Like to humble myself is an effort. Yeah. I think, you know, the more you do it and the more you do learn, maybe perhaps the easier it gets. But I think we've got a tendency to not humble ourselves and a tendency to not learn. Yeah. And that's the talking about a battle to fight, like that's the passivity in us.
Yeah, I think, and to be fair, again, John Eldridge does make that point. He said, you know, for some people, the issue for them may not be the fact that they're kind of very agreeable and passive. It may be that they're actually mega assertive and you know, always pushing their will. And he says, well, your battle to fight is to tone it down. You know, your voice doesn't have to be heard at every meeting. You know, take a back seat and allow others to take the wheel for once.
Yeah, the reason why you're not learning is because
that's going to be, you know, for a certain individual, that's going to be a real challenge, because, you know, if they're naturally driven, you know, leader types, they're going to want to take the wheel. It's like, no, it's like you don't have to do that all the time. You know, your battle is to actually take a step back.
That's it. And the Bible says like no student is greater than their master. And you know, in Jesus we have a masterful master who cannot be outstripped of that position. So we're always in the student position when it comes to Jesus. And yet he said that we, his followers, will do even greater works than him. What does he mean?
What does that mean? Well, indeed.
You can always put the question back onto me, Mike, because I'll just fire questions at you all the time.
You do. But I'm actually gonna. Well, we can come back down to the bit.
It's a segue.
Kind of going back to the passivity piece, and again, you know, most people, again, generalising here, but certainly with my church experience and with plenty of Christians you meet. I remember when I first became a Christian and would tell people about my martial arts backgrounds, and I'd be like, oh, you know, you can't be doing that. Kind of the evangelical side.
This is unchristian.
Yeah. So it's unchristian.
How dare you?
It's unchristian because, you know, there might be like Eastern mysticism attached to, you know, your martial arts, and then the other side's like, oh, well, you know, isn't that a bit violent, sort of thing. So there's kind of like this culture of passivity baked in, and again, one thing John Eldridge really does well in the book is kind of, you know, ramming home, kind of like, well, actually, you know, Jesus wasn't just the ultimate nice guy. He was, you know, he was a fierce, you know, wild man as well. And like one of the points he uses to kind of drive this home is, you know, okay, if that is your view, then what the hell do you do with chapters like when it talks about Samson, who killed 9,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey after the Spirit of the Lord came upon him?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Yeah, you can't say that
you're not going to find any Sunday school lessons on that.
Well, yeah, God wasn't against that because he instigated it.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, so, and then, okay, so then we come to, okay, well, what about Christ on the Sermon of the Mount and turn the other cheek? So, you know, And I think so. Here's my take on this, and I'd be interested to see what you think, Jerry. Is it's kind of like highlighted or made apparent by there's a Jordan Peterson quote which said, "A good man isn't a nice man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has it voluntarily under control," and kind of makes you think. And he would say, well, if you're a nice guy, or I'll phrase it this way, in regards to turning the other cheek, if someone hits you and you're not able to hit back, or you're too scared to hit back, then there's nothing virtuous about not retaliating because you're not able to. It's like you've got no option to. Whereas I think the virtue is, okay, someone struck you, you could hit back, you have it within you to hit back and probably do them a lot of harm, but choose not to. So I think in regards to that, and it's kind of highlighted, I think, in the Luke's Gospel, where the Romans, Judas comes with the Romans to arrest Christ, and Peter pulls out his sword and cuts one of the ears off of the Roman guards. And Christ says, obviously, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. But he also said, do you not think that I could summon, thousands of legions of angels if I wanted to? But the scriptures must be fulfilled. And it's kind of like he's saying, you think I'm outnumbered. It's like there's still an imbalance of power here. I could summon 1,000, legions of angels here if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I'm still the greater side of this force. So just it's just an interesting point there. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts, because again, if I was attacked by a 5'2", 40-kilo man, for those who can't see us because we're doing it audially, I'm 6'5" and over 100
quite
kilos.
Quite a big guy, Mike.
So,
possibly a giant.
Yes, relatively big. If the short guy hits me and I hit him back and put him down, there's zero virtue in that. If anything, like, I'm the bully, even though they instigated it.
Yeah, no, I mean, to answer directly, I think, the Christian should be prepared to go to violence if necessary, or to get physical if necessary. And also, like, in the context of a debate, like, the Christian should be able to defend themselves vigorously and also indicate that, because sometimes indicating it is enough to get a conversation back on track and get it to be productive. Like the threat of further assertiveness or the threat of getting physical sometimes is enough. And actually, you just as you were talking about that, I remembered one thing which provoked me to become a Christian is when I went to uni, I made friends with a Christian guy, great guy, and we laughed and we joked, and he did all the things I kind of did, but there was one thing that was very different. Like, when we got onto the topic of God, like, when I used to meet Christians, I would always wind them up and take the mickey out of their faith. I tried to maybe get them to, like, swear or something, because I knew that a lot of them wouldn't swear, or that kind of thing. I basically try and make them to feel weak, or silly, partly for fun, partly as banter, but sometimes I maybe cross the line. Anyway, this guy, like, I couldn't provoke him. I couldn't provoke him to get very angry with me. When I wound him up and was annoying, he wasn't annoying back to me in the same way, which of course he would have had permission to be annoying back, because I opened that door to him, and it really provoked me. I was like, why is this guy, why can't I kind of wind him up? Why is, because I knew that if he wanted to, he was an articulate guy, he was a strong guy, he could have defended himself, he probably could have taken out the mickey out of me for all kinds of things, but he chose not to. And I think, what I would say now is, the reason why he had that patience is a fruit of the Spirit of God, and he obviously was strong in himself. He'd won lots of spiritual battles, so he didn't need to win the silly banter fights against me, because he'd already found his value, his identity, and his strength in God, and that really provoked me. So, but I mean, if he hadn't have been able to give me banter in return, then I think it would have been less effective. It would have stood out less. If he was just a wimp, and he didn't respond out of wimpiness. Wimpiness is not attractive.
No,
to anyone.
Yeah, wimpiness is not attractive, and it's not a virtue.
No,
and as you kind of made the point, but again, obviously we've used the examples of physical violence is perhaps an extreme, but it's just simply to highlight the point. You could reduce it to, you know, just having the ability to say no, and mean it.
Yeah.
You know, so like that's kind of enough of a victory, and kind of not being too passive. It's like, okay, there's a line, you know, and it's not going to get crossed.
Yeah, that's it. And maybe just to start to come to a close, I'm going to have a go at the England team. Have you been watching any of the football?
I'm not really a fan of football.
Cool, that is probably a good thing at the moment. So at the time of recording, England, they've just they've got through to the knockout stages, and they've just beat Switzerland, but they did that by the absolute skin of their teeth. And the England team at the moment, they have a terrible trait of starting out fairly attacking, scoring the first goal maybe, but then just defending and kind of sitting on their laurels, sitting on their hands. Other ruder phrases could be used, but I won't do that. And because of their defensiveness, which, you know, all the pundits really say it comes from the manager, who himself used to be a defender back in the day, because they're so defensive, they just invite further attack onto themselves and invite further pressure onto themselves, which is, as you might be able to tell, it sort of certainly provokes a lot of anxiety in me and many other people when we watch. But I wonder if the church in the UK are quite like that. Like, they're good at the more defensive side of Christianity. So, you know, within the church building, they feel strong. Maybe within their own intellectual belief internally, there's strength there. But I feel like the church in the UK, they struggle to show their Christian strength in the world. They struggle to speak to people about Jesus. They struggle to publicly be Christians, and I just wonder if, in doing so, that just invites pressure onto themselves, and you know, if we do that, we're gonna shrink spiritually, because we'll feel strong maybe in the church building, but then out in public we'll be like, I don't know what to do, and that seems to me to be a bad thing.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if all you do is defend, eventually you will concede.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of in the opening chapter of Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, he talks about stand up straight with your shoulders back. And it's interesting because you think, in regards from like a defensive position, you know, people hunch forwards and like slouch their shoulders, and what that's doing is protecting all their vitals. But actually what that does is that just makes you actually, bizarrely, makes you more vulnerable to attack, because you can't see as well. In a boxing fight, if you're hunched over, you can't see the shots coming towards you. You might be able to absorb some of them, but you're not in a position to counter or to throw
initiate
anything.
Yeah,
so you need to be actually stand with, you know, correct posture, stand taller. You still stand side on, so you reduce the angle. But the point is, you're not hunched over. You're having correct posture. You're looking forward to be able to see what's coming towards you, so you can throw shots. And the idea of, you know, standing up straight with your shoulders back is simply, okay, I know that my vulnerables are exposed, but I can take it, and that's what kind of that communicates to the world and those around them. It's interesting because chatting to my wife in regards to bullying, is like why are some kids kind of prone to bullying, and they did a prison study where they looked at the inmates and they found that particular inmates were kind of prone to being bullied and picked on, and they just kind of observed them, and they noticed like a commentary was like they wouldn't walk properly and they were very slouched with their posture. So again, the idea of that being that, you know, poor posture kind of says, oh yeah, he's not sure of himself, he's weak, he's vulnerable, therefore he makes himself an easy target. And when they taught them to walk properly with correct posture, they stood up taller, and all of a sudden, like, they looked like they could handle themselves because they were walking confidently.
That's good. I like that.
And again, just in regards to the church, it's like, yeah, don't just we've kind of come into, I suppose because we're very individualist, and we're just like, you know, the idea of it's me and my personal relationship with Jesus, therefore, you know, Christianity is like a private religion, or it's a private affair. It's like, no, it's actually not.
Yeah, and there's a lack of humility there if it's only between you and God, and you don't have to interact with fellow believers or submit yourself to any leaders within the church. That's a lack of humility. And if Jesus himself was humble, and we say we're in a relationship with him, but we're not showing that humility, then perhaps we're not in a relationship with him.
And again, it doesn't need to be like, you know, you don't necessarily need to be stood on a street corner or going out every night of the week. It's just simply taking a stand. And it could be something as simple as like, maybe you don't want to get into, you know, deep political discussions. So I'm on naval course at the moment, and one of the girls on the course just asked, oh, you know, Mike, what do you think about gay marriage? Just a simple answer: marriage is God's. Yeah. It's like, I didn't need to go any further than that, because she knew exactly what I meant, knew exactly absolutely. Where I stood. And yeah, it's just taking those small little steps. Obviously, when you do that, kind of, you know, invites further questioning, but just have the courage to take a stand.
Yeah, because if you let bad ideas encroach upon you, and I agree that gay marriage is a wrong idea. There shouldn't really be such a thing as gay marriage, because that's not the idea of marriage. I think, you know, the gay community need to invent their own thing rather than repurpose an institution which God has established. But if we allow kind of bad ideas to encroach upon us more and more and more, we leave wrong ideas unchallenged, then we invite pressure onto ourselves, but also maybe like Adam, we miss those opportunities to teach and to preach. In Christianity, it's something which is preached, not because we ourselves think, oh, these are fantastic ideas, that they're my ideas and I'm gonna shout them as loudly as I can, but in humility to God, we preach the things which God has instituted and revealed, and we do it that way because God is a complete authority. It's a good thing that God is actually inherently good. Many authorities in the world are negative, but God is actually totally good and totally pure. So it's worth preaching Christianity, and we can undo our tendency towards passivity, and we can and should preach, from a humble heart, but we preach in the assertive, kind of attacking, battling posture. Cool. Any last words for this podcast? I'm not about to kill Mike.
Any last words? Yes, perhaps just be good to briefly summarise what we've spoken to. Obviously, looking at John Eldredge's A Battle to Fight as the first kind of masculine virtue. Obviously, we are in a battle. We don't just wrestle against flesh and blood. There is a spiritual dynamic to that. But then, obviously, so much of just your day-to-day battles is just that battle against passivity, or
Yeah.
maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum and actually, you know, you don't have a passivity issue at all. You're just overly assertive, or you might be considered too assertive. So it's just taking the step back when you need to take a step back, and taking a step forward when you feel you really should take a step forward, and then just looking at little ways where you can kind of gain mastery over your physical body and your emotions. So, you know, can you deny yourself? You know, can you go a day without eating? You know, can you go a Friday without, you know, obviously a Catholic practice is no meat on a Friday. It's like, okay, well, that's actually a little bit harder than you might think, especially, you know, I love a steak and I love a burger. We've just eaten loads of burgers.
Yeah.
So, you know, can you deny yourself in these small ways? And then obviously, how do we grow spiritually? And, you know, obviously reading the scriptures, reading the lives of the saints, and, you know, emulating, putting into practice the things that they did.
Yep.
Did I miss anything?
No, that's great. That's a great list. And I think Christianity, of anything that we could possibly aim our lives at, Christianity is the most challenging life that you could choose. So it's full of challenge, and that should kind of excite our spirit rather than suppress it. So I've been Jamie,
And I'm still Mike.
yeah, and this has been the Bildad the Shoe Height podcast. Thank you for listening.
See you next time.